studies dealing with just what is the number of mass shootings in the United States. And, of course, everyone likes to talk about the U.S. with the gun culture. It's got to be the leader. But a couple of studies came out, and the results are quite different.
There was one a while back done by Adam Lankford, a professor at the University of Alabama, and he claimed that 31% of global mass shooters are in the United States. 31%.
And we apparently account for 4.6% of the world's population, to give you an idea.
Yeah, and so that everybody ran with that. Nobody bothered to see if it was true, if he made this up, if the study could be replicated. What were his sources? How did he calculate the data? He's never presented it. He just said it, and everybody said, oh, okay, and it became headlines. So he says 31%. Our next guest, John Lott, says over the last 15 years, it's U.S. has accounted for less than 3% of all the mass public shootings. Now, that's 1/10 of what Lankford claims. He's president of the Crime Prevention Research Center, John Lott. And is he ready to go? We got him online. All right, John Lott, welcome to the John and Ken Show.
Hi, thanks for having me on.
Well, thank you for coming on. We were just explaining to the audience, Adam Lankford from the University of Alabama says the U.S. has 31% of all the mass shooters in the world, and you say we have less than 3%. Somebody is way off.
Right. And I imagine you don't think it's you, right?
Well, yeah, it's actually about 1.4%. That's the most conservative estimate that I have. Look, Lankford, his claims were cited frequently by President Obama. President Obama, a couple dozen times, made that claim that the United States was unique, that we were leading the rest of the world in terms of mass public shootings. And the White House would constantly refer to the then unpublished study by Lankford to go and back it up. And when it was released in 2015, there were literally hundreds of news stories in the United States that repeated his claim, and it got coverage in at least 35 countries.
Every major news organization I could see ran a story on it. New York Times, Washington Post, Newsweek, CNN.
Los Angeles Times. You can go down the whole list. Every major one that you would have heard of, National Public Radio, Public Television, everybody had news stories on it, prominent ones. Countries like China must have run like a couple hundred news stories themselves about it because it made the United States, I guess, look in a bad light.
All right, let's talk about your number.
Right.
Your number is less than 3%. By it's here in the Washington Times. It says you looked at data from 1998 to 2012, and you found 2.88% were in the U.S.
Of the shootings, and right.
Yeah, 43 out of 1,491 mass public shootings. And the U.S. came in 58th on a percentage basis. How did you get your numbers?
Well, what we did was there's something called the University of Maryland Terrorism Archives, and they have information on bombings and all sorts of other things around the world, shootings. We also used different types of computer databases. Lawyers would have obviously heard of things like Nexus and Westlaw. But then even that wasn't enough. We had to go and hire people in different parts of the world to go and do investigations for us. So we had people that could speak Russian and Chinese and French and Spanish and other countries, other languages. And, we spent over $50,000 on just hiring people to go through this. So it was a non-trivial task. But one thing that I came away with is that there's no way we got all the mass public shootings in the world over that period of time. One of the things with Lankford is he claims that he looked at about a 50-year period of time. But I have no clue how to go and find a shooting in Africa that killed 4 people in 1960s or in the 1970s.
There's not media coverage in a lot of these places.
Well, even today. You can find shootings in Africa where you'll have one news story where 15 people were killed. And it doesn't even have that many details even on that. You have parts of the world where the homicide rate is more than 20 times higher than the homicide rate in the United States. Killings are just too common for them to go and give much news coverage to. And the other thing you learn quickly for international crime data is the United States is extremely unique in terms of the amount of crime data we have. About half the countries in the world don't even report firearm murders or firearm homicides. They just report total homicides, and they don't break it down by race or gender or anything, by age or anything. They just report, the only thing they report is the total number of deaths. And so kind of detail about number of people who shot somebody to death where 4 more killed. We're like the only country that collects that type of data on a systematic thing. And I suppose it's one of the things that makes people believe that we're somehow unique in this. But if anything, we're way below the average. So what Langford looks at, he claims 31% of the shooters around the world are in the United States over this 50-year period. And we find in the 15 years we looked at, it was about 1.4%.
All right. Hang on the line. Can we come back? I want to talk about Langford's study because he's not describing how he got there. Maybe you have some insight or some educated guesswork on how he came up with a number that's, over 10 times what you say it is. It's John Lott, president of the Crime Prevention Resource Center. He's done his study, which says that the U.S. has less than 3% of the world's mass public shootings.
It's being compared to a man by the name of Adam Langford, a professor at the University of Alabama, put out a study a couple of years back, and he came up with 31% of global mass shooters are U.S. people.
John and Ken, KFI. John and Ken Show, John Cobell, Ken Champeau, KFI AM 640. We are talking with John Lott, president of the Crime Prevention Resource Center, and he has a study out which says that, contrary to another very well-publicized study, the U.S. has less than 3% of the world's mass public shootings and less than 1.5% of the world's shooters. And this flies in the face of another study done that says we have 31% of all the shootings in the world. And that was done by Adam Langford at the University of Alabama. Lott's study obviously dramatically contradicts it. We're going to get John Lott back on here. The Washington Times called Langford up, and Langford said, "I am not interested in giving any serious thought to John Lott or his claims." Why do you think he's not open to seeing how you arrived at your numbers?
Well, I mean, there's a dramatic difference between the two of us. I have released the whole list. We have people can go to our website at crimeresearch.org, and we have a 450-page set of cases in 10-point type to try to make it fit on that many pages. That lists each case, the date it occurred, where it occurred, some details about it, and the news sources that one can go and find to double-check on those things. He's refused to give his list of cases, despite it getting all this international news attention. He won't even tell people, as you noted before I came on, how he got the cases or where he looked them up. The only source that he cites is a New York Police Department report, which he says is complete and comprehensive for at least the last couple decades, which I assume covers the period of time that we looked at. And the NYPD report states up front that they only looked at English language Google searches for these things. And they know that they haven't gotten everything, and they're not even close to getting stuff. And so, the one source that he says is complete for at least a couple decades of the time period that he looks at, if he had accurately cited them, themselves say that they don't have very much of many of the cases.
So he hasn't shown any of his work?
No, he hasn't.
Well, how does this get to be a story then?
Because I think it showed people what they wanted to see. And, it's amazing. At the time, I'd get calls from like the Washington Post asking me to comment on his results, and I would say, well, can I see a copy of the paper? And they said, well, he's asked us not to give it out to anybody. And I said, well, I've already asked him for the paper. He won't give it to me. It's a little hard to comment on the paper without him giving it to me. And the thing is, he would only give it to media when he first got the attention. He finally, others could get it, but it was about 5 months after all the media coverage initially was on it. And when you read it through, you realize he was missing all sorts of details that would allow you to kind of find out what he had done. And I would contact him. I'd say, can you give me your list? He said, no. Can you tell me exactly how you found these cases? He said, no. I say, can you tell me what languages you used? He said, no. He said, the only thing I can tell you is that I spent a lot of time on it. And that was it. And I've tried to get other academics, and other academics have contacted him around the country, and he's refused to give it to them. I mean, to me, I warned the media at the time. I said, look, if the person's not willing to share with you his list of cases, I mean, he's claiming that there are 202 shooters in the rest of the world. That's not a big list. I mean, maybe you're talking about 80 attacks or something that he claimed occur in the entire rest of the world over 47 years. I would hope most people would think that seems like a ridiculously small number,
yes,
given all the terrorist attacks.
Yeah.
I
mean, that's
exactly. Well,
that's a bad weekend in Chicago.
It's like you said in the first segment we were talking to you. Based on your research, it'd be almost impossible to figure out these kinds of shootings in many parts of the world because there's just no record keeping.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's they're not even newspapers online from some parts of the world a decade ago. We're very spoiled by thinking that, all the data and access we have to information. It's just not true for large portions of the world. And those often are really dangerous, bad areas where that's true.
You got another professor, Carl Moody, an economist who studies crime at the College of William and Mary in Virginia. He said, when I saw John Lott's paper, I went to the Global Terrorism Database and counted the number of mass shootings in the U.S. compared to everywhere else. Lott is right. By the way, anybody can do this. The GTD database is free and available to all.
Right. Yeah, no, we've shared this with lots of academics around the country to try to get comments before we put it out. And we have lots of very strong comments. I mean, I think I co-authored a piece in the New York Post today with a guy named Mike Weiser, who was a professor at Columbia and at Berkeley. He's a strong gun control advocate. I had talked to Mike, and I had said, you and I don't agree on much, but I've tried to get this information from Langford. You're a strong gun control guy. Maybe he'll talk to you and give it to you. And he blew off Mike Weiser also. And Weiser was ticked, that the guy would be making these claims and not even willing to share how he got the data together on this. I mean, this is something that has had a huge impact on the debate. People believe now, in large part because of statements made by President Obama, who was relying, Obama said, on Langford's study, as well as all the news stories on this, that the United States has more than its share of attacks. We make up 4.6% of the world's population. We make up 2.8% of the shootings, 2.1% of the murders from these, and 1.4% at most of the shooters. All those are much less than our share of the world population. We're well below the average country in terms of mass public shootings.
All right, John Lott, we got to go, but we thank you for coming on and sharing all this.
Well, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
All right, that's John Lott. He's president of the Crime Prevention Research Center, and he did a study about mass shootings and concluded that the U.S. had less than 3% of the world's public mass shootings, but a guy that's gotten a lot of attention for the past couple of years came up with 31%. Of course, the media loves that, and he won't share his data.
And nobody in the media asked him to share.
Well, apparently the Washington Post got something from him, but he won't give it to anybody else.
But they didn't publish it so that it could be inspected.
We got more coming up.
Everything's propaganda. Everything's fake news.